Welcome to the ROBOTalk Podcast, your ultimate source for all things Robotech, anime, and more. Each week we dive into the world of anime, offering insights, interviews, and discussions about the classics and the modern hits. In today's very special episode, we bring you an exclusive interview with the man behind ROBOTECH Captain Gloval, Greg Finley. This interview was originally recorded in 2010 by our own Tom Bateman. This interview goes into Greg's life growing up in Beverly Hills and then joining the military, and then gets into his acting experience with Robotech. He also gets into the difference between playing Captain Gloval and General Leonard on Robotech, and then how he fell in love with ADR work overall. Whether you're a longtime Robotech fan or new to the series, this is an episode you won't want to miss. So for now, sit back and enjoy this episode of the ROBOTalk Podcast. On February 1st, 2024, Greg Finley passed away. We're posting this interview as a tribute to a great father, husband, friend, and actor, to share with all of his family, friends, and fans.
Greg, so where did you start out?
I started in Beverly Hills, Tom. I was the son of a very famous television and radio personality, Larry Finley. So I grew up with that proverbial silver spoon in my mouth. But fortunately, I was exposed to a lot of extremely talented people. Got to meet everybody on my dad's TV show when he did it. And naturally went into acting. Seemed to just kind of float into that in high school. And in fact, I played Billy Bigelow in Carousel at Beverly Hills High School in 1964. And from that, I was offered an apprenticeship in equity at the old Valley Music Theater out here in the San Fernando Valley. Larry Bishop and I were asked to join them for that summer. And I eventually got into acting after a long hiatus from it. Spent a lot of time after high school, did military service, was in the automobile business for 10 years, and then came back to Los Angeles to be an actor. But oddly enough, my first SAG job was I read The Crawl on Tony Thomas's movie Satan's Triangle. In fact, I think I can still remember it. Since 1943, over 1,000 men, women, and children have died off the coast of America. No one knows how or why. This is an explanation. That was my first Screen Actors Guild job as a voiceover artist. From that, I did a lot of on-camera work for many years until I discovered looping, ADR, group ADR. And that's when I pretty much left the on-camera work and became pretty much exclusively an ADR artist. I would never have become an ADR artist had I not had the training and the learning it from the inside out doing Robotech.
Oh, really?
It's kind of a giant circle, yeah. Robotech being the syndicated cartoon series back in the early 1980s that kind of took Japanese anime to a new level here in America. And I was a part of that, and I literally learned the ADR business by being a writer and a dialogue director and doing characters on that.
How did that come about, that particular job? And what was it that was different from other acting or entertainment jobs that you had done up until that point?
Well, I mean, I was used a lot over at Intersound, which was the studio where they recorded Robotech, and I knew everybody over there. Knew Greg Snegoff and Stevie Kramer and of course Bob Barron, who was just the sweetest guy. I knew them all because we worked together over there doing Indonesian kung fu movies and weird cartoons and stuff like that. And one day I got a call from Bob. He said, "Oh, you got to come down and you got to audition for Robotech." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, just come down. There's got to be something here for you." So I did. I went down, and he said, "We want you to do the part of Captain Gloval for my audition." And I said, "Well, what kind of a character is it?" And he said, "Well, he's the captain of this giant spaceship." Okay. Well, what does his voice sound like, Bob? He says, "Well, he's sort of European, and we see him as being kind of European." I said, "Well, European what? Scottish, Irish, German, Russian, Transylvanian?" And Bob said, "Yeah, that sounds good." And that's where Captain Gloval's weird accent comes from.
So what exactly is his accent that you zeroed in
It's
on?
a combination literally of Bela Lugosi's Transylvanian, Scotch, and Russian. My dad's Russian. I'm half Russian. I mean, from miles and miles back. But I mean, it is my heritage, and the accent is very easy for me to pick up. And then I threw in a little Scotch and a little Transylvanian, and that's Gloval's accent. It really is. I was, of course, thrilled when we got ROBOTECH because I kind of, after watching Macross and getting an idea of what they were doing, I thought it was going to be very successful. I was very sure it was. Almost immediately, I think literally 2 or 3 weeks into the process, they asked me if I would be interested at all in writing any of the episodes. And I said, well, sure. I mean, yeah, I know how to do that. Of course I didn't. But I did, and I took it on, and I think I ended up writing 10 or 11 of the 85 episodes. It was really, really cool. And then as a writer, they asked me, well, you want to be a dialogue director on it. And I used my son's names, Guy Garrett. I have 2 boys, 140 and 126, and I used their names together to be my name on ROBOTECH.
What was the process as far as as writing when you got involved in that? As far as what sort of guidelines did you have? Did you work with the original scripts or the episodes? How did that work?
The producer of ROBOTECH, Carl, and he just passed. This is so sad. Like as I get older, I forget things. Anyway, Carl had a vision of taking these 3 shows, turning 3 separate Japanese television shows into one giant arc series. And he had this idea that melded the plot line along through 3 generations. And what he would do is he sat down and he wrote out the giant book of the whole thing, and then they broke it down episode by episode. And believe it or not, I mean, it was really an unbelievable undertaking at the time, but we seemed to just, I don't think we knew that we couldn't do it, so we just did it. And he would say, here's where we want the story to start, here's where we want it to end, and there it is, it's already on film, so just watch it. And literally you'd sit in front of your little 23-inch television set with your VHS tape player, and you would rewind it and watch the characters' mouths move, and you'd write the dialogue in according to the outline that you had for that episode. And where you took it, the words you used, that was entirely your own. The idea being to hit the labials, hit the things where the lips came together, to have the B's, the P's, and the M's, so that it looked like the dialogue was written originally for those frames. And it was an incredibly long process. You can imagine how many times you have to stare at a character whose mouth is going up and down and up and down. All you're seeing is just flap, 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 flap. And then you're thinking of, well, I've got to make this say the protoculture will be bypassed by the SDF's intermission engines or something, or anything like that. So it was really it was an interesting process, but that's how we did it.
Now, that was something you'd never done that before. So was it a process of just learning as you go?
It was very much a process of learning as you go. Again, Bob Barron was the head guy. Steve Kramer, I think, was basically the story editor, and they would work very closely with the writers. There were several of us that wrote on that show, and worked very closely with us. And as we brought things in, and if it didn't get developed right, the directors had the power in the booth when they were recording the voices to change anything to make it better, because the idea was to turn out absolute superior product.
So with working on that show, dealing with, having Carl Macek as the resource there, was that the guy you went to and said, oh, if you didn't understand, what concept that was coming out?
No, Carl was he was much more the big picture guy. He was, if he wasn't running into this editing session or this recording session, or in trying to make deals, trying to get the whole thing sold at the same time, Carl was very much that way. He kind of put that in Bob Barron's hands. Okay. Bob was the one who really, when you had a problem, he was the one you could go to, and he was the one who kind of juggled all the players, and there were many very talented, wonderful, again, Snegoff, Kramer, Barron, There's so many people. It's just, and it was a long time ago, and I'm so much older now. But I mean, it was an incredibly tough job. Carl was the overall visionary. It was Carl Macek's overall vision that guided everything. And he was, when you did see Carl, he was more of a cheerleader and a rah-rah, and go, keep pushing, because we were all working on deadlines and working on, trying to get it completed as quickly as we possibly could. And he was a good cheerleader. He was a good guy.
Do you have a favorite line of Captain Gloval?
I do. Gonna be a long trip. That's my favorite line of Gloval. He's smoking in the on the bridge of the SDF-1, and he kind of walks forward and he hits his head, and shortly after that he says, "Gonna be a long trip." That's my favorite line.
You also played another role in Robotech, which was General Leonard.
Supreme Commander General Leonard.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, I like that character so much, I even shaved my head and mustache recently so I could look like him. No, seriously, I don't remember that being anything that we had talked about, because I was really hired to do Gloval, and then I became more involved. And then they were looking for a voice for Leonard, and they said, well, why don't you just use your regular voice? I had a lot of military experience, say within the previous 15 years, and it seemed to work out well. And I just had that kind of military attitude and using my own voice. I'm often known in Hollywood as the man of 1,000 voice, because no matter what I do, it does still sound like me. But seriously, it was different than Gloval. It was different enough in a different segment, a different part of the series where they were never together, and it pulled off very well.
A lot of people looked at Robotech, and one of the most popular aspects of it is Robotech's positive portrayal of the military. Did that enter into your mind as you were working on the show?
Very, very much so. Mm-hmm. Supreme Commander General Leonard was a bit of a old, didn't care about the casualties, didn't care about statistics. He just wanted to get the mission done. I have a very favorable view of the military. I had a wonderful experience in the United States military, so I naturally brought that to the part and to the role because of my own experience. I was in the United States Army from 1965 until 1969. The 4 years that I was there, I went through Officers Candidate School, got commissioned, went through the Special Forces Officers Course, learned Vietnamese, spent a year and a half in Vietnam with the Special Forces Group, and had a very positive experience. Met a lot of very talented, very creative, very tough, strong individuals, and it was a very positive experience for me. So I was able to convey that to the character, and in my writing too.
Right. With General Leonard, did you see him, like you had your explain to you who Captain Gloval was, but with Leonard, at this point, were you on the writing staff?
Yes, at this point I was on the writing staff.
So when it came to the point of where they were discussing when General Leonard was, how was that either described to you, or what did you bring to the table? Did you see him as like a General Patton type?
Actually, I think, it was funny that you would say that. I kind of thought he looked a little bit like Omar Bradley, who I had met, by the way, in Vietnam. Bradley being one of the five-star generals that the United States Army has commissioned, or the military has commissioned over the years. And I just kind of patterned him over after that, and the way General Westmoreland acted when I was interacting with him in my capacity as the training officer at the McBee Recondo School. And General, I did try to convey that positiveness, because push comes to shove. It's a job, and you need to do the job very well in defending your country or your ideology or your planet. So yeah, I think that I did.
So going back to your beginning,
Yes.
With you're growing up in Beverly Hills, so you're part of the original 90210 crowd. I mean, no, way.
I actually
before,
think it
yeah.
was. Well, of course, Carol Rosen, who was a dear friend all through grade school and in high school. I think we even dated a couple times. Carol's brother was one of the producers on 90210. And I actually played the father of the kid that accidentally killed himself playing with a gun on 90210. I grew up. I went to Beverly Hills High School from 61, graduated in 1965. Had a great class. I had a lot of fun there. I rarely had any academic work at all. I was in theater. I was in music. I was the president of the a cappella choir. I was the president of the madrigal singers. I played football and wrestled. I did the spring play every year. I was very busy. I didn't learn anything academically, but I had a wonderful time. It was a great experience, a wonderful social experience. I actually did. I learned English very well. I kid.
So, Greg, 1960s, early 60s, Beverly Hills High School. What is that like?
It was a terrific time. I talked to people who didn't have a good experience in high school, and I really feel badly for them because, again, I was able to do all the things I truly loved. I loved playing football. I was on the varsity team as a backup guy as a freshman. Started in the varsity football team as a sophomore, was all league. By the time I graduated, I was the captain of the football team, most valuable lineman in the league, all CIF. It was like I just had this great time in football. Wrestling the same way. Loved wrestling. It was a lot of fun. Drama, spring play, first year, Brigadoon, got in the show. Was part of the a cappella choir my freshman year, and from that I graduated into the madrigals the following year. We went to Hawaii. We toured Hawaii. We toured San Francisco. And there were great people. I was surrounded by great teachers and great kids. And yes, we were privileged. It was Beverly Hills. I mean, my first car was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air that my grandfather left me when he passed. But a lot of my friends, they were very, very well off, and they were driving new Corvettes and new Chevys and new stuff. But we were privileged, but we were good kids. We really were.
Any famous classmates?
Oh, sure. I had a lot of wonderful famous classmates. Rob Reiner was in the class just before us. Albert Brooks and Richard Dreyfuss were in my class. Larry Bishop, less well-known actors, but wonderful actors. Julie Cobb, Legia Cobb's daughter, was in our class. And so our productions, our school productions were really, really quite good. Very good indeed. In fact, the producer of a couple of TV shows out right now, Paul Rabwin, was in our class. We had a lot of talent.
Moving on from high school, when did you go into the military? When did you go into the Army?
10 days after I graduated Beverly Hills High School, I said I do in Compton. Now, let me explain how that happened. My mother had remarried, and her husband at the time wanted nothing more than to get me out of the house. Our maid, her son was the recruiting sergeant in Compton. So it was like I was predestined to go in the service after that. So I enlisted in Compton 10 days after I graduated from Beverly. I enlisted in the Army. I was going to be a clerk typist and go to Germany, but my first paycheck was so small, I said, how do I solve this problem quickly? They said, well, become an officer. So I went to officers candidate school, and from there taught platoon tactics for 6 months, then went to jump school, Special Forces Officers course, Vietnamese language school, went to Vietnam, went through the MACV Recondo School, was then asked to represent the 5th Special Forces Group in Malaya, and went through the British Jungle Warfare School with the intent of incorporating some of the things that the British had learned in the Malaya incident into our lesson plans in long-range recon, which was what we taught at the Recondo School.
What was the Malayan incident?
The Malaya incident?
Yeah.
It was an uprising. Britain was they were a great empire builder. They had a huge empire, and as far back as the 1940s, the people in Malaya kind of revolted against them. And so there was a large revolutionary force, and they basically used different tactics, tracking and jungle warfare tactics to defeat them and keep control of Singapore. And that's what that was about.
What your service in Vietnam? How much time did you actually spend there?
I was there for 18 months. I went there as a first lieutenant. And of course, when my first year was up, they had a deal. You could, let's make a deal. You could enlist, or you could extend rather your stay in Vietnam by 6 months, and then move up one grade. So I went from first lieutenant to captain. The trade-off was that I had to spend another 6 months in Vietnam. So that was really a no-brainer for me, because captains made more money. And I'm kidding about the money thing, but it was an opportunity. I mean, I went in grade from second lieutenant to captain in only 24 months. I mean, I graduated from OCS May 26th in '66, made first lieutenant in '67, made captain in '68. That's pretty unheard of. So I was very, very fortunate. I was big. I was 6'2" at the time and weighed 185 pounds, and I was a lean, mean fighting machine.
Do you still remember some Vietnamese?
Yeah, phải. That we not a bit nói tiếng Việt Nam giỏi lắm, which means yes. This captain knows how to speak Vietnamese very well. Actually, I only speak Ít Thôi. I do have some Vietnamese friends, and they laugh when I say Chào An or Chào Ba, which is hello, and I do still remember quite a bit of it. The ironic part, of course, being the Army, the truck driver who goes in the Army and becomes a cook, and vice versa. The ironic part was, at the Macek Recondo School, we trained only free world military forces, no Vietnamese at all. So my only chance to use the language was in working with the indigenous population around the city of Nha Trang.
Any other interesting stories of your time in Vietnam outside of the recon school?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got lots of interesting stories. One of the most interesting highlights was the New Year's Eve just before I came home. I came home in February of '69, March of '69. But Martha Ray brought the troop up to Ban Me Tuot and actually spent New Year's Eve with us at the B detachment in Ban Me Tuot. At that time, I was no longer at the Recondo School. I had been reassigned as the S1 officer at the B detachment in Ban Me Tuot. My mission, of course, was to handle personnel for the entire B detachment, but mainly they wanted me there was because I could write. There were like 150 or 200 awards and decorations that were just sitting in boxes and in drawers that were not being submitted to the Department of the Army for consideration. Everything from medals of honor down to Army commendation medals. And it was my job. In 6 months, I basically cleaned all those up and wrote them, and that was my job there. But anyway, Martha Ray came up with her troop, and we actually stayed friends right up until the time she passed. She was a great gal. Colonel Ray was a great gal.
Upon leaving the Army, what happened then?
Well, while I was on leave in the Army, I met this young lady who was a widow and had 4 daughters. And I literally fell in love with all 5 of the girls, settled in San Francisco, married Nancy, adopted her kids. And a year and a half later, we had a son, Guy, who is now 40 years old and in the business, in show business. He's as the executive director of Mesa, which is a trade organization. Anyway, settled there. Got into the car business after spending a little bit of time as a stockbroker and selling everything from, fire alarms inside the house. I finally got into the automobile business and was very successful working for Ford in the South Bay area. And then in 1974, when Nancy woke up one day and decided that it would be better if I left, our marriage kind of went away. I moved back to Los Angeles in October of 1974 with the intention of trying my hand at what I had done so well in high school, which was acting. Little did I know that I would become an actor of voice.
So what was your first experience in that career change, moving into acting?
Well, it was very interesting. I felt I still am. I feel like I'm a very good actor. At that time, I'm sure that I thought I was a better actor than I actually was. But I got an agent almost right away. From 74 to 79, I maybe did 2 or 3 different commercials and smaller parts. But in 1979, I signed on with Dick Lovell of the Lovell Agency, and I started going out and I started booking 1 job, sometimes 2 jobs a month.
What time frame is this?
This is 1979, 1980, 81. Just before my experience with ROBOTECH. I was the bailiff on every show on television, I think, from Sheriff Lobo to Falcon Crest to Chips. I said, do you solemnly swear to everybody in Hollywood? And I also did some interesting, fun things. I played a bad guy on Dukes of Hazzard, played a bad guy on Bill Shatner's police show.
T.J. Hooker.
T.J. Hooker, thank you. It's so funny because Jimmy Darren was on that show, and when I did the show, we kind of just had lunch together maybe once, but later in life, in 1990, I went through the Sheriff's Academy with James Darren and Fred Dreyer as I became a reserve police officer with the city of San Fernando.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of interesting and fun. Anyway. But I was not to be denied. I knew I could make a living as an actor, and when I finally did start working consistently on camera, that's when I was given the opportunity to do the ADR, the group ADR voices, and I found that to be an incredibly. I saw right away it would be a great career, so I went for it and stayed with it.
How do you move from just your regular voice acting into ADR, and what exactly is ADR? Well,
voice acting can be many different things. There's all sorts of different voiceovers. I was explaining this to a friend of mine's son who's getting into the business now, that, there's announcers and commercial multi-voice, and there's spokes voices, and there are character voices in animation, and character voices they're all different. But ADR, which is putting back into film the sounds, all the different background sounds, the television broadcast, the PA announcements, the people talking at parties, the cops in the squad room mumbling or grumbling, the laughter, whatever. That is a very specific thing, and that's called group ADR. Or looping. And I got into that by my friend Paul Rabwin, who was producing Chips at the time, asked me to come and revoice an actor who they didn't like his voice. And I did that. And about 1.5 years later, I was given an opportunity and met Barbara Harris of the Looping Group, and became an integral part of that group over the years. I've worked for Barbara now, I guess, for 27 years. And literally thousands of movies and television shows, putting in the voices that are not recorded on the set. Basically, that's what you're doing. You're just filling in all those voices that are not recorded on the set.
You've been listening to the ROBOTalk Podcast, produced by All Pop No Culture. This show is entirely crowdfunded by our Patreon site, patreon.com/ROBOTalk. Supporting us there not only helps us improve the quality of the show, but also allows us to bring in special guests for interviews, discussions, and more. Take a look at the Patreon page and sign up to support all of the great content we have planned. And now, back to the interview.
Greg, you were on seemingly every popular 80s sitcom and cop show. Were there any interesting stories from those days?
Well, yeah, actually, I've got a few interesting stories. One of my favorite stories that I've told over the years is that I was brought in to read just a one-day, one-line scene on T.J. Hooker. And it was the part of a guy that gets rolled. He comes out of a bathroom and he's just wearing a towel, and his wallet's gone, his pants are gone, etc. And I went to the casting session, I went to producers, and I said, I don't think America's ready to see Greg Finley in a towel. So I think that maybe this isn't the very best part for me. And they laughed. They had such a good time. I go back home. Within an hour, the phone rings. My agent calls. They just booked you on T.J. Hooker. We got a week guest star, and you're playing the third bad guy. You're a helicopter pilot. They'll send you a script. I mean, when does that kind of stuff happen? That was really cool. I had so many fun times. When I was working on Dukes of Hazzard, one day John Schneider said, "Well, why don't you, we were breaking for lunch, and it was going to be a long lunch." And he said, "Well, why don't you, head home or do something?" And I can't exactly remember what it was, but I do remember that he said, "Well, just take my car." And he had this really cool, like 1976 Corvette, and he let me drive it. That was kind of neat. Wow. I thought that was kind of cool. I got to work with Lynn Redgrave on her series. Again, I played a cop. I played a cop on almost every show I could possibly think of. I was always the bailiff. My agent saw me as a security guard or a bailiff, and that's pretty much what he sent me out on. And of course, when you're doing one day, one line, one scene, you're not the star of the thing. When you do a reading for that as an on-camera actor, all you want to give them is basically the line. They've written the line for a reason. You're just moving the story forward. You're not that important. So I was very good at that kind of stuff. Time to go. The bomb squad's on the way. Be seated. It was fun. I had a great time. I remember that at that time I thought, wow, this is really cool. And then I got introduced to Group ADR, and my life was ruined. Because the voice acting thing was just so much. There was so much more creativity and more spontaneity. It was like being part of an improvisational theater group, only you're just acting in front of a screen, doing what you see on the screen, improv, and working with some of the most talented voice people that you could possibly work with. I will say that working with Barbara Harris for 27 years, I've worked with some of the best voice talent in this town. Consistently, day in, day out, she puts the very best people up there. I worked on so many movies and television series. For example, I was lucky enough to do many of the monster voices and background voices on X-Files. I did almost 100 episodes of that. I did a lot of the village voices, the people living in the little town there on Northern Exposure. In fact, I can tell a very funny story about working on Northern Exposure. I did many episodes. The associate producer of the ADR, his name was Bill Angarola. And just a sweet guy, really nice guy, and loved working with him. Still love working with him when I get the opportunity now. But back then, when you see someone every week, funny things can happen. And it got to be where in every episode of Northern Exposure, I would make up something with Bill Angarola's last name. Like I would say something like, "Are you still knitting that Angarola sweater for me?" Or we'd be in the restaurant and I say, "I'll have a bowl of warm beef Angarola." But I put his name in every time. That was a fun experience. I mean, I go back to Cagney and Lacey. I did many episodes where, all the squadron voices. That's me and Andy Garcia, the actor. Of course, Judy Durand is one of the best female voices that's ever been around, most creative. We used to have like a party every Monday night working on Cagney and Lacey. We'd go to the studio at about 6 o'clock. We'd have a little dinner together, and then we'd sit down, watch the screen, and just make the voices come alive, make the background voices come alive.
So when you're watching, that on screen, like, what do you say? If you take us into the booth, like you're watching on the screen, what do you say? What comes to mind, like if you're watching?
Well, of course, it's broken down scene by scene, but it's very important to remember that you don't say the same things if you're working in a nuclear physics lab as you would say if you were at a bar in Manhattan, or that you would say if you were in a trial room as a juror. So there is research. You do research on each of these assignments, to make sure that what you're saying is appropriate and has to do with what you're watching. For example, when we did Howard the Duck, we were told to learn everything there was to know about nuclear physics, which of course is ridiculous, but did a lot of studying so that when you're in the laboratory, if you do catch a smidgen of the background voices, it's authentic, it's real. In What About Bob, we had a small, a small yachting community, things that you would hear or say, while you were, on a yacht. Well, you do that research, you read it, and you study it a little bit, so that when you talk it, you're looking at the screen, and someone, raises their hand, for example, you could say something, yeah, go ahead and pull it in. Where the wind's changed or whatever. If you're in a nuclear physics lab, you wouldn't say, pass me the chocolate donut. You'd say something like, did you get a copy of is that going to be on your hard drive? Did those tests prove to be effective? These are things that make ADR, automated dialogue replacement, which is what ADR stands for. This is what makes that more authentic, and you just learn how to do it. It's just improvisational theater, but it's all in relationship to what you see on the screen.
When you're watching on the screen, do you key on, like you see a background actor walking in, they're pointing at a dial or something like that, and do you focus on that actor and try to come up with what do you think that guy might be saying at that moment?
Well, if you're lucky enough to actually have his lip flaps, actually be able to see his face enough to see his lip flaps, that would be handled as what we call a specific. You do the overall background track of just people talking. You do those in couples or two or three, or perhaps do a group of actors just, doing general conversation. But then specifically, you go in, cue the recording to start at the beginning of the lip flaps, and then you put the actual words in that you think that he's saying. Again, according to the lab bills. Like I said, the things that I learned doing Robotech and writing dialogue for animation, where all you saw was the lip flaps, have come in to be great use to me on the ADR stage. And that's how you do that. So you put the words in to fit the length of time that the guy's speaking, and hopefully it'll look like it's coming out of his mouth. That's the art. That's what we do the best.
Where did you first catch the acting bug?
I was in grammar school and had a speech therapist I worked with. Her name was Madeline Sevenson at Hawthorne Elementary School in Beverly Hills, California. And she wrote a play called Anyone for the Moon. And I got cast in that. I was 12 years old. And it was so much fun. It was the first experience I had of actually acting. Again, ever since I can possibly remember, I was with my father at the radio station at KFWB, or else over at KTLA or Channel 13 or KABC, watching his television shows. But again, there was variety. Didn't have anything to do with acting. My first acting experience was in Anyone for the Moon at Hawthorne Elementary School. So when I went to Beverly Hills High School, that interested me. But again, I was more in music. My voice had changed. I was a very early bass. I think I was a bass in 5th grade. So I was called on to sing in choirs. And at Beverly Hills High School, I joined the a cappella choir my freshman year because I didn't want to take a lot of studying. I really wanted to do just football and sing, and that was what I wanted to do out of high school. But the point I'm trying to make is that they did a musical called Brigadoon, and I got cast as Archie Beaton. So I got to use, again, the acting. And acting seemed to come very easy for me. My sophomore year, the spring play was The Diary of Anne Frank. And I was a sophomore, I was reading against some very, very strong actors who were seniors. But I was cast as Otto Frank. As a side note, my second cousin, Rod Serling, brought Joseph Schildkraut, who created the role of Otto Frank on Broadway, brought him to see my performance as Otto Frank in Beverly Hills High School's production of The Diary of Anne Frank. And I got to meet Joseph Schildkraut that way. That was kind of cool. But anyway, acting then became that experience doing The Diary of Anne Frank made me like acting even more. You know, it never dawned on me, even having Rick Dreyfuss as a friend and knowing that he was doing, working as a working actor, it never dawned on me to actually get serious about doing it professionally or doing it for money in high school. I was much too busy, playing football, wrestling, doing the choir thing, and just being a kid.
You said your second cousin was Rod Serling?
Yeah. My father's mother's sister's son was cousin Rod. Yeah, Rod Serling.
What was he like? Because he's such an iconic figure, when you're watching Twilight Zone reruns. He's a constant prince on it. But what was he like?
He was exactly like that in real life. No, I'm kidding. He was the warmest, sweetest, nicest man you could possibly imagine. Loved his family. His wife, Carol, and his two daughters would join our family, which included my mom, dad, my two brothers, Guy and Jean, and my Aunt Claire and Uncle Harry, and my grandmother and grandfather. We would meet on all the Jewish holidays. We'd go to my aunt's house, and Rod would be there with his family, and we'd do all of the Christian holidays at my mother's house because she was Episcopalian. So we, Christmas and Easter, we were all together as a family at my mom's, at my house. And for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and all the Jewish holidays, we were at Auntie Clara's. But Rod was always there. He was funny, he was generous, he was sweet. I tell a funny story. When I was only 13 years old, I was at my... I learned to drive when I was 12, for whatever reason. I mean, I never drove, but I learned how to drive when I was 12 years old. And I was 13, I was over at Aunt Clara's house, and Rod came by, and he said, well, you want to take it for a spin? I said, what, take the Avanti? The Studebaker had given him an Avanti because they were the sponsor of Twilight Zone that year. And I said, you're kidding. He said, no, just drive it around. Don't go where you're going to get in trouble. I was 13. I was a big kid. But he let me take the Avanti and drive it around. It was kind of really cool. Kind of crazy to think about it now, but he was just a great family guy. When I went in the service, he said, come over. I want you to come over. I want to talk to you about the service. And so I went over to his house in Pacific Palisades, and he was out in his, he had an office out by the pool, and I walked in, and he said, see there? And he pointed up to his wall, and there were 7 Emmys sitting on the mantle of his fireplace right there, and above that was a Purple Heart. He says, I got that in the Pacific, and I just want you to know that I think what you're doing is really cool. Do whatever they tell you, just listen, and you'll be okay. And then he brought out a yearbook. I guess the year before, they had gone back to Fort Benning, and he had done a jump. He jumped at the age of like 50, whatever he was at the time, 51, or he was probably 51 because he died when he was like 52. So it's ridiculously sad. Anyway, he showed me the pictures of the jump that he had made. He was a great guy. He was a great, great guy.
Were you a fan of the Twilight Zone?
Oh gosh, yeah. I've seen them all. I still watch them. You flicking channels, and all of a sudden you come onto a Twilight Zone marathon, and you got to see everybody because you got to watch it until it's off. I mean, every actor in the world, everyone worked those Twilight Zone. You see Telly Savalas without hair. Robert Redford was on it. I mean, Charles Bronson. I did a movie with Charles Bronson, and I mentioned to Charles Bronson that I was a big fan of his, and that I loved the thing that he did with Montgomery, that little episode of Twilight Zone. And he said, "Thank you." Funny thing, I when I got to work with Charles Bronson, I first shook his hand, said, "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bronson." And he said, "Thank you," and didn't say another word to me outside of what was scripted the entire day. And then at the end of the day, I said, "It was a pleasure working with you, sir." And he said, "No, thank you." And that was it. That's all he said to me. Mm-hmm. It was pretty cool. Anyway, but yeah, Twilight Zone. I'm a big fan of Twilight Zone. Big fan of Night Gallery. He was a genius before his time. He was a great creative writer. You know, you look at the body of his work, the things that he did for Playhouse 90 and back in New York, Requiem for a Heavyweight, and
7 Days of May.
I mean, it's just, he was just this prolific, wonderful writer who wrote real. He wrote from his heart, and he wrote what was real, and he still told great stories, and he told stories that were meaningful. And a lot of it was ethnic based. A lot of it was based on his family, the Serling family back in Scranton, and the experiences that he had as a kid, and hearing the stories about Europe in the war. But he was the best. He was just a great guy.
Greg, who are your inspirations and influences as an actor? Like, which actors or which films did you see that really just inspired you?
Wow. I was an usher at the Stanley Warner Theater in Beverly Hills, and they brought in Lawrence of Arabia. Had the world premiere there. I remember I got to be the outside doorman, and I opened the door, and Donna Reed came out and gave me a kiss because I'd known her since I was like 7. But anyway, Peter O'Toole has always been one of my favorite actors. He was there. I actually met him at the world premiere. It was very interesting. But I've watched his career throughout, through the last 40 years, 50 years. And he's always been a great inspiration. Burton and O'Toole did a movie, Beckett, and it was like a 2-man movie. That was a tremendous inspiration to me. I think Richard Dreyfuss's, my buddy's success after Dirty Kravitz and Jaws, and then winning the Oscar for Goodbye Girl, that was a tremendous inspiration to me. I like acting. I like actors. I like the process. I like the gratification and rewards, applause as much as money, maybe even more applause than money. But it's just, it's been really fun and interesting. I hope I answered the question. At my age, sometimes we get off on these tangents, and you never know which way it's going to go. By cricky, well, whatever. Sorry, Walt.
No, you're doing it. No, you did great. But going on to that, because you've done so much work, ADR, looping, voice work. You've done some on-camera work, but you've done a lot of stage work, mm-hmm. and both not just as acting, but you've actually been involved in a lot of the productions. What are your great memories for that?
Well, I mean, I stage again started way back in high school when I got asked to Equity Apprentice. That was a lot of fun working at the Valley Music Theater. Whenever I had a chance to perform, even in Officers Candidate School, I remember I did I was the MC when we turned to become senior candidates. I actually met my wife. When I moved back to Los Angeles, I was trying to make it in film, but I needed to, in the meantime, while I was auditioning, I needed to actually work the acting chops. And so I auditioned for, community theaters and for light opera companies. I played Laser Wolf at Long Beach Civic Light Opera's production of Fiddler on the Roof. I auditioned and met my wife at doing Showboat at the Granada Theater in Granada Hills, California. A year and a half later, Patty and I were married. She played Chipley, the comedy lead, and I played Ravenel, the romantic lead in that show. But I loved theater. I loved musical comedy. My favorite roles were like Billy Bigelow and Ravenel and Harold Hill and Music Man. I just truly enjoyed those. But when we settled in Santa Clarita, one of the first things we did was we got into a variety show. And at the variety show, my wife was asked to audition for Fiddler on the Roof up here for the Canyon Theater Guild, and she did. And she played Golda. And I helped participate in that show. I was behind the scenes, actually. I was kind of helping the orchestra conductor who worked behind the scrim keep up. But anyway, we became very involved with the Canyon Theater Guild. I've directed for them over the years, musical directed. I've musical directed shows like Forever Plaid and Oklahoma and Guys and Dolls. I've had these really fun assignments. I've directed the Christmas show at the Canyon Theater Guild for the last 8 years. 7 of the 8 years I've directed their Christmas shows. I've done Christmas Story and Christmas Carol and Miracle on 34th Street and It's a Wonderful Life, these terrific shows. And as a performer, I've been able to play Emile Debec in South Pacific, Daddy Warbucks in Annie. I did it 11 years ago when we were at a very small theater up Sierra Highway here in Santa Clarita. And now I'm going to be doing it again for the Santa Clarita Regional Theater in July of this year. July 24th we open. I'm playing Daddy Warbucks again. I really love working on stage. That's, to me, the most fun. So I'm very lucky to have been able to not just act, but also direct and musical direct in musical theater, because it really is it's the most fun thing I do. Even though group ADR is a lot of fun.
Greg, as a experienced voice actor, what is the most common, or what do you think is the biggest misconception about doing voice work?
That all voice actors are very, very rich. No, I think the biggest misconception is that everyone thinks that it's just your voice, and it really isn't just your voice. There's a lot of really wonderful voices out there, but there are so many different things. Again, going back to the different fields of voice work, animation, the commercial announcer, the multi-voice acting, group ADR. The biggest misconception is that you can be good in all those things, or that you do one, you do them all. It's very specialized. It's very intense, and it's the trained and the persistent succeed. One of my favorite sayings is, nothing takes the place of persistence. Not genius, not training, not education, not anything. Persistence alone wins out over everything. Like luck. What is luck? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. If you're prepared and you have the opportunity, you're going to get lucky. And I've been very, very fortunate to have been lucky. And I'm very, very happy that I picked ADR as my specialty, because I got to work with a lot of great actors. And again, it's a lot like working on stage. It's like you're working in an improvisational theater group. I've been very pleased.
thank you for listening to this episode of the ROBOTalk Podcast. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/ROBOTalk to help us constantly improve the show and bring in more exciting guests. Until then, thank you for watching and listening. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.